standard of living. It's simple. The minimum wage was last raised in 2009 and has failed to keep up with inflation, increased productivity, and the average wage in the past decade. A family of two earning federal minimum wages will be living under the poverty line, and that is not even accounting for parental children, healthcare costs, etc. The most fundamental reason why the minimum wage should be raised is that as a country, we have the responsibility to assure the living standards of our citizens. The bump from $290 a week to say $6 a week will lift millions of families out of poverty. While members of the opposition may argue that the government welfare programs are actually supposed to do that job, we believe that there is both a moral impetus and an economic and efficiency incentive for companies to just pay their workers fairly. Additionally, not only does increasing the minimum wage help workers, but also businesses. Simple economics here. More money in the hands of consumers, more purchasing power, more demand. A higher minimum wage would put more discretionary dollars in the pockets of millions of Americans. That money that would then directly flow to retailers and other businesses. The roughly $120 billion paid extra to workers would be pumped back into the economy, causing positive ripple effects on the entire system. From the government and business perspective, this is great news, which is why 67% of small business owners support the minimum wage to be increased. Furthermore, not only does raising the minimum wage boost the economy, businesses also benefit from the resolution because it increases both productivity and worker retention. When low-wage workers feel that their job efforts aren't keeping them out of poverty, there is much less incentive to work hard and be productive. These negative sentiments also lead to lower employee retention, which is terrible for businesses due to the cost of recruiting and training new workers. Raising the minimum wage is a basic issue of fairness in a society where income inequality keeps rising. The bottom line is that as a government, we have the moral obligation to assure that our citizens are paid fairly and adequately, so that their standards of living are sufficient. Therefore, for the sake of our workers and for the sake of our businesses, the resolution today to increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour must stand. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for her remarks and call upon the member of the opposition to open the case for the opposition with a constructive speech not to exceed 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to everyone who came here tonight to watch us talk about the minimum wage. I would like to begin with what we both agree on the government and on the opposition. This resolution is essentially about the welfare of our citizens. But more specifically, we all agree that this resolution is about redistributing, putting the economic burden from one place to another. Where the government is wrong, right, in their proposition of the case, is that they are saying the economic burden shifts from the from the workers to the businesses, while in reality, the burden is shifting from the government to the businesses. Because under the status quo, right, currently, people aren't actually getting less money. If they're paid less, the government supports them through welfare systems. And those welfare supports are expected to increase even more now under the Biden administration. So really, their plan doesn't really impact workers in any significant way, because if they get paid more in terms of wages, they just get a little less in terms of welfare. Instead, what is changing is that businesses are now paying that bill instead of the government. And in a pandemic, the opposition believes that the government should be taking on that burden because businesses already struggle enough as is and should be protected, especially now. To that end, we have 2 points today for you why this would be a terrible policy. The first is that we would be hurting businesses, and the second is that we would be hurting workers. But before then, I want to take a moment to talk about the contentions, the points brought up by the government. They had two as well, and they're basically the same as ours, but exactly opposite. They said that this plan of theirs would alleviate poverty because people would have more money. But as I've already said, right, people wouldn't have more money. They would just be paid from a different source. Instead of getting welfare support from the government, they would just now get a higher wage. So at the end of the day, there's no real change in how people function. Their second point was that it would benefit the economy and businesses in general. And that's not exactly right either. They gave two reasons. The first they gave was that consumers would have more money to again spend on businesses, which is true when you're talking about big government stimulus checks. But in this case, right, because the businesses are paying for the consumers to have money in order for the consumers to pay the businesses are effectively paying themselves. There's no real way where businesses can pay money so it can be paid back to them while the government is taking a portion of it in taxes, which results in the businesses having more money than they originally output. On the other hand, in the current system where the government supports more people on welfare, this does happen, right? Because when the government puts money in, it's not from the businesses. So when people have more money to spend because the government gives it to them in terms of welfare, the economy is boosted. So in that sense, the government's plan, right, that they are proposing today really gets rid of this already good thing that we had of boosting the economy and replaces it with something that doesn't. Their second point to support their business benefiting business point was productivity and worker retention. And we agree that productivity is important, right? It boosts economic growth in the long term. That being said, right, even if each individual worker is more productive, and we won't really dispute that, but if a lot of people aren't working because there are mass layoffs, as we'll get into in a second, there's going to be less productivity overall just because less people are being productive. So with that, let me move on to reasons why we actually proactively should be opposed to this resolution. Our first is that we would be harming businesses, especially small businesses. Right? We are pushing an economic burden onto businesses that the government traditionally held. And it's not a small one either, right? Each employee would have to be paid about $15,000 more every single year. So if you're a restaurant, for example, with 7 employees, you have to foot $100,000 extra every single year. Now, a lot of businesses can't handle that, right? They already have tiny profit margins, especially restaurants, where the average profit margin is between 2 to 6%. That's really small, and with this increase, many of them probably wouldn't make it. And let's not forget, there's a pandemic going on. So businesses are already struggling with so many of these factors. They don't need something else put on their plate. So businesses are hurt and they might go bankrupt. But that's not the only reason why we should be so vehemently against this resolution. We have a second point, that it would actually hurt workers as well in the long run. We've already talked about how workers wouldn't be getting more money because of this, since they'd just be losing out on welfare. But there would also be unemployment growth, unlike anything we've seen in recent history. And there are a few main reasons for this unemployment. The first is that there would be a lot of going out of business, as we've already talked about. So if businesses go bankrupt, then they can't employ people, so there would be layoffs. But on the other hand, right, even if businesses don't go bankrupt, because they are forced to cut costs since it's more expensive to keep people around, they're going to have layoffs anyway. And a final point to support that why this would hurt workers by causing unemployment growth is that this would incentivize a lot of businesses to use machines instead of people, causing more and more destruction to the job market in the long run. The Congressional Budget Office just last week ran a study on almost this exact policy and predicted that just by 2025, this would cause 1.4 million jobs to be lost. We can't shift this burden that the government traditionally holds onto people and businesses that are already suffering. And because of that, the opposition is firmly against the plan that the government is proposing, and we hope that you agree with us and vote against it. Thank you.
I thank the member of the opposition for his remarks and call upon the Minister of the Crown to continue the case for the government with a constructive speech not to exceed 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, throughout that speech, the opposition has tried to obfuscate this debate. They've used complicated reasonings to explain why giving workers more money actually hurts them, why giving businesses workers who are more loyal, workers who are more productive, as they conceded was true, actually hurts them. But we don't need to rely on these fancy and elaborate chains of logic. We can look at the facts, because the facts say that the minimum wage has been raised throughout the history of the United States. And the observations we have of what's actually happened refute most of their points and actually support our idea. We all want the same things, to produce a thriving economy that is fair for our workers under our rationale. But we will show, and I will show throughout the speech, that that can be done only by increasing the minimum wage. So I'm going to begin by attacking their oversimplified points and explaining why they don't actually stand in the economy, even though they make intuitive sense. And I'll then go on to rebuild our own points and explain why, contrary to what the opposition is saying, we are helping workers and helping businesses. Now, they first talked that workers would be hurt because they would lose their welfare and the government would not have to pay for them. Now, there are many responses to this, and even the audience is intelligent enough to know of them. Now, the first thing is just a moral obligation. It is not of the government to pay for people who are working full time. The government believes that if you are an employee of the United States and you work, you should not need the government. This is in effect a corporate subsidy because taxpayers are the ones who are paying for themselves. And since taxes are paid by all US citizens, workers are actually the ones providing their own salary under the notion that this should be an issue of welfare. Second, the whole welfare system of the United States is riddled with bureaucracy and red tape and loopholes that can often deny people money. And so wages and actually giving people the freedom and the flexibility to spend money as they want is a far superior way to actually give people productivity and boost economic productivity, as there's no strings attached. You can pay and you can use your earnings however you want. Now, their second reason they said it would hurt workers is it would lead to massive unemployment. However, as I said, we can look at the times that the minimum wage has been raised, and that hasn't been true. And we can extend beyond the United States. There are countries in Europe with far higher minimum wages than we have that actually have lower unemployment, such as Luxembourg. And rather than looking at the theoretical studies of the Congressional Bureau Office, we can look at studies done by Berkeley that show that raising the minimum wage actually increased employment because people were incentivized to get these jobs once they knew that working would actually bring them out of poverty. And once working actually gives you more money than welfare, which isn't true now, people are incentivized to find jobs because they're getting more money working than they are being unemployed. So instead of subsidizing unemployment, we should get people to find jobs and be treated fairly. Now, their second contention was about hurting businesses. However, it again relied on this notion that workers being paid more would drive businesses out of money because they simply can't afford it. But that's why we're raising it gradually. We're making times to adjust. And in addition, businesses are helped by the very things we all mentioned. So that is why I want to actually transition into our own contentions of why this helps the economy and why this creates a better world. First, about boosting business. And I want to go into these actual facts and what we see. Because the minimum wage puts money in the hand of consumers. So even if restaurants might have to pay their workers more, it's offset by the increased demand they get to actually afford that. Not only that, think about it. They're essentially saying that if businesses can't afford to treat their workers fairly, we must rely on exploitation. Even if there is more capital being allocated to labor, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And businesses will find a way to become more competitive and work smarter. We shouldn't have to force businesses or allow businesses to pay their workers less on the assumption that they just can't do it. They can't make it so that their workers can pay more. And their notions about and their refutation about economic productivity assume that it's just some straight one-to-one ratio, that if you give workers money, you're just getting the same money. But that ignores the fact that in the large corporations that are the biggest employers of minimum wage workers, money isn't being allocated to productive ends. It's being hoarded or sent in offshore tax havens. And so allocating and forcing that more of that money actually goes into demand and actually is shifted throughout the economy, facilitates more transaction and is better for the economy. Because now, instead of being in the hands of people who have thousands of times more money, but can't buy thousands of times more because all people have the same needs, it's reallocated to where it's better being used. So even if the government isn't injecting more stimulus, where the money is matters. And now to our contention of helping working people, which is just obvious. If you give people more money and agency without strings, they can do better. But there's also just the argument that we need wages to reflect what people are putting in. As the Prime Minister mentioned, since the 1970s, there's been this decoupling of productivity and wages. and workers are actually giving 6 times as much more to their businesses, even though wages have stagnated. So on to our issue of fairness, if workers are becoming more and more efficient and giving more to businesses, then there's no reason that they shouldn't be reflected in their pay. And to the point of automation, that's going to happen anyway, because an iPad kiosk will be cheaper than $7.25 anyway. And so delaying this on the grounds of automation is actually a futile argument. So we need to protect the people who have jobs instead of demanding that all jobs remain without significant pay. So for all of these reasons, because putting money in the hands of workers helps them, but also helps their employers, creates a stronger economy filled with more demand, we need to pass this resolution, and we must engage with the government's plan to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of the Crown for his remarks and call upon the Leader of the Opposition to conclude the case for the opposition with a constructive speech not to exceed 8 minutes. Sorry, excuse me, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this final speech, I'd like to respond to the final remarks introduced by side government before then rebuilding the points in side opposition and then finally boiling this debate down to its core and crux. Ultimately, right now in this debate, we all agree that the primary value in this round of debate is protecting the welfare of our citizens. But it's only because we on side opposition, by extension, also want to stay within the realm of economic realism, we are proud to oppose this resolution. So firstly, onto the remarks of side government. In response to their first contention of it helps workers, we responded that people are just paid by companies, so there's no real change in the amount of money that's being exchanged. Now, side government responded that companies can pay people more, especially large corporations who are right now paying CEOs exorbitant amounts of money. They just choose not to. While this may be the case for larger companies such as Amazon or Google, where they're paying their executives a lot of money, this isn't the case for the smaller restaurants that my partner was talking about, which only has margins of profit of around 2 to 6%. So once again, this policy specifically harms these small restaurants, which account for the majority of restaurants across the United States. It doesn't actually harm these larger companies as much as it harms these smaller ones. And because these smaller companies are harmed, the workers for these companies are directly harmed, which harms the welfare of these citizens specifically. Now, in response to their second contention, which they claimed that it helps businesses and the economy as a whole, side opposition or my partner responded that the economy is boosted under the status quo because of certain welfare programs. And now side government responded that we want to give people a choice and that welfare doesn't give people a choice, whereas giving people money does. Now, we have a few problems with this. Firstly, we're not helping these employees who are working on minimum wages because we strip away their right to be able to work for less money. When we are talking about people who are working for minimum wages, we have to remember the type of employees who are working. These are generally lower skilled workers who don't have degrees to the same extent as people who are more experienced or who have degrees in the market, which means that if someone wants to work for less money to have a competitive edge in the market because they don't have the experience or skills to compete with other people who have degrees, they now no longer able to because we're mandating that everyone is paid $15. So which increases significantly unemployment for these lower skilled workers that we're directly trying to help by taking away their leverage and taking away their ability to work for less money, which directly harms their disposable income and the amount of disposable income they have, which harms the economy as a whole. So now on to our contentions. We claimed firstly that it harms businesses and secondly that it harms workers. In response to our first contention in that it harms businesses, side government responded that businesses are just helped because people can spend more. But once again, this brings us back to the cyclical reasoning of side government. They claim that in every single instance, every single person who's working right now will continue to have their job. And if that were the case and everyone's suddenly paid $15 rather than the $7.25 in many states, this would be great. But once again, that relies on the assumption that everyone still has their job after we pass this policy, but not only because of the pressures imposed on these smaller restaurants, but also because of the fact that these employees are losing their leverage to work for less money. We are going to see rises in unemployment, which once again works against these businesses. Now, secondly, we talk about how it hurts workers because it's going to increase unemployment and it's going to lead to 1.4 million jobs lost, according to the Congressional Budget Office, by 2025. Now, side government responded that because we're increasing wages, we're technically helping them and we're increasing their disposable income, and that people should be morally paid a good enough of a salary. Now, first, onto their first refutation, it increases wages. Once again, for some people, that might be beneficial and they might make more, but for the most amount, for a lot of these lower skilled workers who can't actually compete with these other workers who are losing their jobs, they're not increasing their disposable income because they don't actually have a job. And they talk about the moral element of people, if they are working for a certain amount of time, they should morally have the ability to make a living wage. Now, once again, this debate isn't ultimately about what is morally acceptable or not. This debate is rather about what economically is able to be done. And when we see that the economic consequences of passing this policy increases unemployment, this no longer is a moral question, but rather a question of whether we can at least have some people in jobs. And once again, for these people who aren't making that much money, who are working for $8 or $9 right now, the government can provide aid in the form of welfare for these citizens. So these people are actually taken care of under the current status quo, which we've seen already. So what does this debate ultimately boil down to? It boils down to whether we actually help our citizens. And the answer is a clear and definitive no. Firstly, it strips away leverage from these workers, as I've already talked about, because even if they want to work for less money so they can get a job, they won't be able to because everyone has to be paid $15. And secondly, it pressures smaller businesses because now they have to pay every single employee far more, which is obviously going to result in significant layoffs. So ultimately, because it doesn't uphold, side government's plan doesn't uphold the central values of fairness in the economy, because it disproportionately harms these smaller workers and these smaller restaurants and other smaller companies, we are more than proud to oppose this resolution today. This House would raise the federal minimum wage to $15. Thank you.
And thank the Leader of the Opposition for his remarks and call upon the Prime Minister to conclude the case for the government with a rebuttal speech not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After listening to side opposition's points, we side government continue to believe that the resolution today that this House should increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour must stand. In the speech, I'll first refute some of side opposition's points and then sum up the whole debate to show you why we have won. Most of side opposition's points are based on the fact that unemployment will increase with a higher minimum wage. Yet, as we've said before, extensive research refutes the claim that increasing the minimum wage causes increased unemployment. We can look at the UK or Australia or Scandinavian countries who all, after implementing minimum wages much higher than ours, the increase had very little impact on their unemployment. And because unemployment has shown to not be affected significantly by a dramatic increase in the standard of living for Americans, we must raise it to maximize welfare. Side opposition also says that raising the minimum wage takes away the competitive edge of these low-skilled workers. Yet there is still a minimum wage, and just like the minimum wage that we have now, these low-skilled workers can still work for just $15 per hour and be more competitive and other workers who may work for more. Moreover, they also say that if workers are paid less, they are supported through welfare system. The member of the opposition keeps saying that the only thing that changes with the resolution is that the source of money for these poor workers changes, that now it's businesses, not the government, that poor people should be supported through the welfare system. Yet the emphasis here is the word should. It comes as no surprise as the US welfare system is one that is highly inefficient and ineffective. Often, many people who need it are not covered by these welfare programs, and even if they were, they aren't offered that many choice. So even if the US welfare system supports everyone who needs help, why should we add extra unneeded bureaucracy to an issue that could be more simply solved? Businesses should act humane enough to pay their employees fairly. The fact that this government can act as a last resort for people doesn't excuse this unfair treatment. Side opposition also explains that we shouldn't put the burden on businesses when many of them are suffering right now. Now, our contention directly counters this. Raising the minimum wage will boost the economy, just like a stimulus check, which would actually help businesses. Furthermore, most companies, especially large corporations who are often the culprits of giving poverty wages, have plenty of resources to pay their employees fairly. They just don't want to. While we recognize that some small businesses have a rough time, that's why our plan has increments. We're raising the minimum wage slowly so that they have time to adjust. The crux of this debate comes down to whether increasing the minimum wage will maximize welfare. And because unemployment won't be increased, that increase in the minimum wage is much more effective than government welfare, and that small business will actually benefit from the resolution, we side government have won. Therefore, to guarantee the welfare of our citizens, to bolster our economy, we must pass the resolution to increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for her remarks and call for a vote on the resolution. So normally, if we were in person, we would physically, in many houses of parliament, people vote by walking out of a door. We don't have doors to walk out of here. So if you believe that the government side has won, give me a yes reaction on the Zoom reactions. And if you believe that the opposition has won, then go ahead and give me a no reaction. Then we'll sort of tally the votes and we'll see who's won here. So I believe that the affirmative, the government has passed the motion today. So congratulations to the government. I declare this House adjourned, and we would be happy to take any questions that all of you have, either about what happened just now or more generally about debate at Groton.
We clearly have very wise incoming students, so I'm heartened by this.
I'll start. Can all of you speak to a little bit about how you got into this? Because I could, even where I'm sitting, I'm like, oh my God, these students are so amazing, or like it's almost intimidating. So wondering what your origin story is to get to this point, and what advice you might give to somebody who's awed by what you've done.
Well, I think I would definitely have to start off by saying, like, just reading the discussion in the comments, which was also very heartening, because I think there's a lot of really great ideas. This is definitely something I think everyone can, and in my opinion, also should do. So to answer Ms. Chika's question, like when I got here in third form, I think debate was one of the first clubs that I joined. And my motivation was just that I think having an argument about the ideas is actually just the best way to see what you believe in, because you're given a position, and even if it's something that you think you hate, you have to defend it, which really broadens your mind in terms of like forming your own beliefs and constantly having to challenge yourself on what you believe. And so I think even besides like the numerous public speaking and like confidence benefits, where you just are comfortable speaking in front of large numbers of people, just like thinking through different ideas and having to engage with them in preparation is, to me, the most valuable part. And I think really beneficial for everyone to kind of just get outside of their own head. So I think that's the experience that I wanted when I joined debate, and that's what I've gotten the most from.
Yeah, like I actually debate after going to one of the sit-down debates that they have here, usually every week, not now because of COVID. But so yeah, I think I like debate because it encourages you to be intellectually open. Some of my favorite moments from debate are just when we sit around the table while we do research for our next tournament, and we're just like discussing, and usually a lot of interesting conversations pop out of that really like make me think about stuff. So
Great. Does anyone have any other questions that we can answer for you all? Yeah, Pipa?
Sorry, I have to allow people to unmute themselves. Give me a second.
Oh.
All right, Pippa, go for it.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one's kind of quick. Do you guys do public forum, or is it just Parliament and whatever the other one is?
So we the league does a few different forms of debate. Public forum is not one of them. We do, like I said, parliamentary, and this was not actually an extemporaneous debate, but normally when we debate in the parliamentary format, it is extemporaneous. So you find the topic out when you walk into the room and have 10 minutes to prepare a speech about it. The Oregon style debates that we do are prepared. And then there are also a few different public speaking events that we compete in. So interpretive reading, persuasive speaking, after dinner speaking, and impromptu speaking are the primary speech events that the league competes in. There are not part of debate, but there are also mock trial and model UN and model Congress clubs at Groton that also sort of do similar sorts of things.
Cool. And then my other question was, how did the like sit down debates work? Like, is it just like after dinner you guys just have a debate, or like is it planned or?
Yeah, so usually depending on who wants it, like if anyone volunteers, they usually get a position to do it, and it can be about anything. Sometimes it's really weird, and sometimes it's more formal.
Yeah, so just elaborate a little bit on what Stephen said there. Traditionally, the first sit-down debate of the year afterwards, the officers do a debate. And then the next sit-down after that, a week later, the fifth formers will be the ones that do a debate, and then the fourth and the third, and then the second formers. That basically takes us through the fall term. And then the spring is sort of more ad hoc, depending on who was interested in debating on a particular week.
Someone asks in the chat how long it takes to prepare a debate for like a tournament. It depends on what format it is. For parliament, you usually do like a practice round with your other competitors before, but because you only have 10 minutes to prepare, like it's like you get the topic on site, so you don't really prepare for it. The other one we do is Oregon, which you can prepare for because they give you the topic like a month before, so that requires a little more research, and you also do practice debates.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, how much you prepare is determined by how well you want to perform. So like sometimes there are tournaments near like exam week where we just kind of go for fun, and maybe we'll only do 2 hours of research over that month for it. And there are other tournaments where we might do like 2 hours every week to the month leading up to it, or even more than that. We also have public speaking tournaments that are scattered throughout the year, and depending on how well you want to perform in those, the preparation is different as well.
Oh, I can answer. The other one was like, do you have any tips or tricks that you use to increase your chances of winning the debate? So yeah, I think this connects to kind of what Stephen was saying, which is really just like practicing as often as you can, which does get challenging at times when the course load, like the academic course load increases. But yeah, I think I would just say like practicing as much as you can. And there usually are like debate heads who are there to help you get better. And also like Mr. Nazio and Dr. Reyes and other debate like guidance counselors who are there to help you.
Just to add on to this, what Gia said about a tip, this might be also one of the most negative aspects of debate, but I find that it's often very important to always be confident and always pretend that everything you're saying is 100% true, even if you know it's not. And then you just assert that it is, people will believe you. So I guess that's probably bad for like polarization and lacking in nuance and things like that. But you really just gotta, portray that you completely know what you're talking about.
So there are a couple questions in the chat. So Joy asks if you guys were flowing today's debate or if this was entirely prepared.
Yeah.
We did the flow. We kind of, because this is an exhibition debate and there's a lot of people, told each other the points we're going to make ahead of time. And then we realized that we had the exact same points but mirrored. So we didn't really talk more about it.
Yeah, what we did was we wanted to have like one where it was spontaneous and like more fun. So we actually did one completely like blind normally last night, and then we just agreed to like not change our points.
But like, at least for Gia and I, we ended up changing it like semi-substantially. So they were cool about that, and it was nice.
And then the second question was, where would the tournaments be held without COVID? So this year, all of our tournaments have happened online over Zoom, but normally different schools host different tournaments throughout the terms. So we actually are hosting a tournament virtually and then hopefully in person next year here at Groton in April. But there's a sort of regular roster of what schools host tournaments throughout the term. So it's pretty much all of the Danaeus schools have a, well, not all of them, many of the Danaeus schools host one tournament per week.
With regards to tournament, I think like, sorry, Aim, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I just say we get Chipotle after debate tournaments.
Yeah.
So
That's what I was about to say. Like the best part is the bus ride back, where we not only like talk about crushing victories or defeats, but we also just like argue about which restaurant we should go to. And like there might be officers that are complete dictators about it and they say we get to decide, or there might be more foolish officers who entertain notions of democracy. But it's really just a really fun aspect where we have like mini debates about where we should eat.
someone asked in the thing about like the mock trial and Model UN programs. So I actually do both of them, and they're separate clubs. So like it's separate people, although some people do overlap. But I think the skills, the fundamental skills that you have in them are like about the same. Like Model Congress is just a bunch of people debating at the same time. So, and Model UN. So yeah, the skills overlap.
And mock trial is essentially debating whether or not someone should be guilty or innocent, right? Based on a certain set of criteria. So it's really same thing. You can do all of them at once. Sometimes that may be a bit much, but I think if you elect to, you can.
Yeah. So I think there's a question here about what schools are our biggest competitors.
Well, no school can quite compete with us, but if you ask them, they would say Hotchkiss and Choate probably. But you know, again, we are going to be better than them substantially.
So Stephen is joking there, obviously, but just for how the tournaments actually work, you don't actually know who it is you're competing against at a tournament until the results come out. So in our league, we have tournaments that typically have about 13 to 15 schools all attending the same tournament, physically located, and everyone has anonymous codes. So over time, you certainly get to know that certain people are associated with other schools, especially if they're consistently winning awards. But for the most part, tournaments are actually run anonymously. So while Stephen is correct that Choate and Hotchkiss have excellent debate programs also, there are good debaters at a whole bunch of schools, and there's good competition throughout the league.
Someone asked in the chat, what is your favorite debate that you have done so far and what made it memorable? One debate that I thought was really cool was when Gia and Sammy and I did with another officer named Anuj over the summer on whether we should tell children that Santa Claus is fake. And it was just really memorable to me because we generated like six like pretty strong contentions over something fairly minuscule.
So there's another question here about have people ever changed their minds as a result of debate?
I think
Yeah.
it's also like when you're like researching or thinking about something, it really like because like sometimes these topics that you have to debate about aren't things that you would think of in daily life. So you really get to like know a topic well, and then from that you learn a lot about politics.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll come across people who are really persuasive and they will change your mind, but you just can't show it during the debate. Like 2 weeks ago, Gia and I were doing a practice with some other schools debaters about plastic disposal, and halfway through, I was like, you know what, they're kind of right, but you just have to keep arguing your side anyways.
There was another question about how many people are in the program, and Sammy's given an answer there. He's actually lowballed it a little bit. So in any given term, we typically have in any given year, we typically have about 60 students participating in debate. But as he says, some are more invested than others. So I would say probably about 20 to 25 compete on a regular basis, and then about 60 do at least one debate over the course of the year. Great. Well, there are no other questions, we don't want to take any more of your time, but if you have anything else, we're certainly happy to answer any questions that you still have.
I'll have the last question. What advice do the students have for all of the students, the prospective students that have logged in tonight? And Michael, if you want to jump in too, you can also give advice if you wish.
I'll let the debaters weigh in on that.
If I had to give one piece of advice, it would be come to Groton and join debate, because from what I've seen in the chat box, this stuff is fantastic. And in debate, in the organization, I'm kind of known for not really complimenting people very often. But yeah, those are very good, and like a bunch of those ideas I'd never thought of before. So I think you guys would all do great.
And like if you come to Groton to do debate, if you should anyways, but when you come, like don't be scared, just like scream. That's all I would say. Just put yourself out there.
Gia, Sammy, either of you could have the last word or both of you could have a word.
I guess I would say more general, like my advice just at Groton is, or just at any place where you go, don't let day to day distract your mind into complacency. So like always question what it is you're doing and what it is you're thinking, and ask yourself why you're doing or thinking those things, because otherwise life can become very stale and boring. So debate's definitely the most fun way to do that, but as long as you're challenging yourself on what you want, then you'll always be on the path to satisfaction.
Yeah, and I guess like even though I love debate and I'm biased towards it, I think like especially when you come here in second, third form, like trying as many clubs as you can and really finding what you like early on is something that I would recommend.
All right. Well, thank you to our debaters. Thank you to Mr. Nazio, and thank you for everyone who's logged on tonight. I had so much fun, and I hope all of you did too. So I will be ending this meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.